All right, in Chapter 10, Lesson 3, we're going to talk about misleading graphs and statistics. So you're going to be looking at multiple graphs and sometimes making comparisons between things that are kind of incorrect in them or which graph would better represent information. You're also going to be reviewing back over some sixth grade concepts of mean, median, and mode. You will have to figure those calculations. So we're going to do that on one of the examples today. All right, so no vocabulary today. We're going to jump right into the first example. The line graph shows monthly profits of a company from October to March, which graph suggests the business is extremely profitable. So if you look at these, like obviously we can see that graph A goes much steeper than graph B. So at first glance, it looks like that graph A is representing, if profits is what we're seeing over here on the vertical axis, and we're seeing that it looks a whole lot steeper here, it looks like graph A is representing more of that. But if we start looking at the increments, so they both start out at 0, 14,000. This one does the same thing. But then if we notice, as we go up here, once we hit 5,000 on each of them, it changes. So the graphs are identical up till this point, but then this one starts going up in increments of 100. This goes up in increments of 500. So that is not a valid conclusion that graph A is representing a more profitable business, because in fact, these two graphs are showing the exact same information. And to show that, it's really difficult in full screens where you can see this better. If I would zoom out, I can annotate directly on that. I can't annotate like it is here, but I'm going to place my cursor on 5,000 here. And then we go up to 5,100. Well, let's figure out where 5,100 is over here. It's actually about where that's at, slightly above this line, right? It can't be all the way up here because that would be 5,500. It couldn't even be halfway in between. So 5,100 would be right there. Well, let's look at the last piece of information. It's at 15,400. So if we go over here, if this is 15,500, just a little bit below that would be 15,400. So this is invalid information because the graphs are not really showing the same increments. So we cannot make any conclusions that, if graph A is representing business A, we can't really represent that it's saying that. So this is here's the answer. Graph A, that's a misprint there, suggests that the business is extremely profitable, but this is misleading simply because the graphs are showing the exact same numerical values, just different spacing, so it looks like graph A is a lot better. Sometimes it's helpful to space out numbers differently. You're going to have a question dealing with temperature on your homework that you will see more spacing for one of them than for the other example. So sometimes that's helpful to have more the numbers closer together so you can see more where there was an increase. If this was my business and I sold $300 more worth of stuff, I think it's more reflected in graph A than it is in graph B. They show the exact same information, but this shows more of a change over between those 2 months. So that's the conclusion that we make, that really it is an invalid conclusion. All right, so this is where we deal with finding the mean, median, and mode. And we're dealing with sofa prices here. So we see that there is a leather sofa, a reclining sofa, a DIY assembly, which I don't exactly know what that would mean, how you would assemble a sofa yourself, because normally those come together, but whatever. So obviously that's the cheapest option. I think about like if you buy beds. I know I bought bunk beds for my son, and I assembled them myself. That would be more expensive than some sort of set that was already put together for me, maybe. So that's what it's kind of talking about there. So that's the cheapest option. And then we've got two other options here: a sectional. Sectionals are like an L-shaped sofa. And then microfiber. So just sometimes it's different material. They have the reclining function. None of that's super important, but we just do see that there's a variety of costs of these different types of sofas. So first, we need to find the mean, and the mean is the average, which means that we need to add up these 5 numbers and then divide by the number that there are. Well, there are 5 types. So we're going to add all 5 of these up, and then we'll divide by 5. That's how we find the mean. The median is found by listing all the numbers in order from least to greatest. So we would start with 350, and we will work our way up to 1700. And we would include values that come up twice. So 1400 occurs twice. I would still put that in there. And then the middle value will be the median. And then finally, the mode is the number that occurs the most often. Doesn't require us putting in any order. So we can see that the only number that occurs more than one time is 1400. So there is the mode. So I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide so you can see the calculations here. I've already explained how we find them, but here is my math. So I added up 1700, 1400, 350, 1600, and 1400. That gave me 6,450. That's all 5 types of sofas added together. And then I divide by 5. So that means the average price of a sofa is $1,290. Notice that that really doesn't reflect any of the numbers that we've come up with, but that's how an average works. It takes your highest, it takes your lowest, it takes everything in between, and it gives you kind of like that, what is an average, right? It's not going to maybe reflect any of the values in there, but it is just an average. The median, so you can see I listed the numbers in order from least to greatest, and there are 5 numbers, so there is a clear middle. One thing to kind of note, this could possibly happen on your homework, that sometimes you might get 2 numbers in the middle. Let's say, for example, I only had 350, 1400, 1400, and 1600, and there's no 1700. Well, then I would have 2 numbers kind of in the middle, the 1400, which in that case, it's still going to be 1400. But what you would do in that case is you add those 2 numbers together and then divide by 2. So it's almost like a little bit of a mean found in the middle of a median, because you have, if there are 2 numbers that are located in the middle, that's what you need to do for that. This one does have a clear middle though, so we're just going to say that 1400 is in the middle. So 350, 1400 gives you the 2 outliers on the left, and then 1600 and 1700 are the 2 outliers on the other side. If that term outlier is kind of weird to you, we will be dealing with that later on in this chapter. So 1400 is the middle value. We can see a slight difference here between the median and the mean. Sometimes those might be exactly the same. In this case, that they are different. The mode is the number that appears the most times, and that's 1400. No other number occurs twice. So this is interesting that we see the median and the mode both have the same values. So the question just says, which measure might be misleading in describing the average cost of the sofa? In this case, the mean is the one that doesn't really fit with the other 2, so it would be misleading. And really why that's happening is because this cost of the DIY assembly is so significantly less than all of the other types, it distorts what is, really kind of the average. I mean, it is the average, but more sofas are over $1,000. They don't have a lot other choices, at least that we know of, that are under $1,000, as low as $350. Another way I like to explain something like this is, think about if you had a classroom of tests, and let's say everybody does really pretty well. Everybody scores a 70% or higher on the test. So everybody gets a C- or higher on a test, but there's one student that gets a 5%. They got hardly anything correct. Whenever you calculate that average, though, that one score is going to drop the average down significantly more because it's so much lower than everything else. So when we're dealing with this, I mean, you could make the argument, well, this is still representing the average. Yes, it is. But because this value here is so low, it's not a good indicator of how much you would pay for this piece of furniture. So the other 2 numbers kind of represent that better. So, if I walked into a store and they told me you'd probably pay about $1,400 for a sofa if you bought one today, well, I wouldn't be shocked whenever I went to see price tags that are $1,700 or the $1,400 or the $1,600. But if I walked into the store and they told me, well, you're going to pay $1,290, I might be a little bit more shocked whenever I'm seeing a $1,700 price tag, and that's because this average is getting dropped down by the $350. $350 is not really a good representation of most of the costs. So it's kind of an interesting question. And this entire chapter, like I've said before, is just, it's a lot of interpretation of something. So I think it's a little bit more challenging than just, well, we add these two numbers and we get an answer. We have to make conclusions based on that. So keep in mind, you're going to need to know these terms of mean, median, and mode. On the homework, you'll see that you have to calculate those, so you can refer back to this if you need to. And then just remember that graphs can be misleading sometimes in the gaps that are shown between numbers. Sometimes those gaps are helpful for us to see differences, but sometimes they can be misleading as well. So that should do it for lesson 3 of chapter 10. Thanks for watching.